I really think that Africans have got to understand that what we have is what it's meant to be. And I'm living in a country that is at the convergence of being Europe in Africa. South Africa is practically Europe in Africa, in every way you can think. The infrastructure, the control of production is exactly like what you're talking about in Germany. It is industrialized. The deprivation of land, you begin to question if it's a deprivation of land because white people are greedy, or is it because they're depriving white Africans of land so that those Africans cannot produce in an African manner, so that the European manner is the only way that is there. So in South Africa right now, if you want to eat fufu, if you want to eat what we call pap or sadza, which is the meal made from maize meal, you can't find maize meal that's not genetically modified. If you want to eat bread, all the bread in South Africa is made from genetically modified flour. And the food, the animals then, are also eating almost 100% genetically modified feed. The chickens are all hybrids. They don't taste like chickens anymore.
Correct.
And that is what South Africa has become. And what is sad is we've got people like Strive Masiwa, people like a lot of these very educated PhD holders beginning to encourage Africa to farm the way that South Africa is farming. But if you look at South Africa, their soils are exhausted. Without chemicals, without fertilizers, they cannot farm. The bees are beginning to go missing. The colonies of bees are collapsing because of the use of chemicals in the fields. The weeds that are growing on this land are beginning to become resistant to herbicides because they have become so used to the herbicides themselves. The water bodies in South Africa have become so toxic that the chemicals inside the water are beginning to mimic estrogen, that the frogs that are in that water are turning into females. And that very same effect is now being seen in human beings, where we are seeing transgender and a lot of the changing of human sexuality. There's a lot I can't say about what I want to say here because the Constitution of South Africa will not allow me to say some of the things I need to say in a particular in this particular segment. But people's sex is being changed by the water that is filled with estrogen, water that is filled with hormones, you know, and this is all coming from the agriculture, the chemicals from agriculture, the pesticides from agriculture, the herbicides from agriculture. And it is beginning to kill the animals. It is beginning to poison the land, and it is beginning to poison human beings. Now, a lot of people say there's no evidence that GMOs are not good for people. But this is what is happening right now. South Africa uses the most GMOs in the African continent. It is also the country with the highest level of HIV. But South Africa, therefore, because of its influence in the region, has got what we call the BLS states. The BLS states are Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. Those countries tend to rely on food that comes from South Africa as well. So they buy a lot of the GMOs that come from South Africa. And guess what? Swaziland and Lesotho have overtaken South Africa in HIV. Botswana is number 4. These are the 4 highest HIV countries in the world. And they happen to be the 4 countries that eat South African GMOs. Is there a correlation? I don't know. But is there a need for us to investigate? Definitely. Because people who understand what GMOs do, GMOs in their own way can be a biological weapon that can be tailored to target particular ethnicities. It can actually target the RNA of a specific ethnicity in the same way that they're engineered to poison certain insects that eat them. So we need to be asking ourselves, what is causing the HIV? Then there is some people who say that genetically modified foods have been experimented and shown to reduce the immunity in rats. So what is HIV? Immunodeficiency. So is immunity suppression something to do with HIV? I can't give the answer, but there seems to be a correlation, and so our scientists should be asking the question and experimenting, not waiting for Europeans to tell them. African scientists, without Europeans in the lab, need to do their own experiments to see what is causing South Africa to have such a high prevalence, together with its neighboring countries that eat the same food, with a high prevalence of this immunosuppression. And if you also look now, the animals that we are raising, be it in South Africa, Zimbabwe, wherever we are raising animals in an industrial manner, feeding them industrial feed, because the Zimbabweans are now feeding their feed from South Africa, because the industry, the agriculture industry in Zimbabwe has been destroyed by sanctions, but it was also being destroyed by these hybrids I was talking about and the use of pesticides. You're now beginning to see problems with the chickens. They're dying. The cows are dying because of the food. Is there an immunosuppression that is taking place in the animals because of the feed that is genetically modified, that has got chemicals? These are the questions we're not asking on the African continent, and our PhD holders will then tell you about researches done in France, in the United States, the same countries that are trying to push these very same products, these very same chemicals, these very same fertilizers on us, and their very same seeds are the people we go and ask to experiment for them. How stupid is that? And these are the things that we need to change. We need to transform the African mind to be inquisitive, to ask questions, and to come up with solutions and answers for themselves without waiting for somebody else to tell us the answer. In Africa is very wrong, because we think that poverty is not having paper money. And we forget that poverty is not having the ability to survive. A lot of us, particularly those of us staying in cities, do not have any ability to survive unless and until somebody has given us a job or somebody has bought our products from our companies. And when they don't buy from our companies, which is what a lot of people are facing with COVID right now, is that with COVID, people being locked down, there are lots of businesses that are not working, there are a lot of people that are not going to work, and a lot of people are struggling. That is poverty. But a person in a village, even if COVID lasts for another 3 years, will always eat, will always have food. They will never struggle for that. They will even have a shelter, because they can use what is on their land to create their own shelter. And so it's gotten to a point where even in South Africa, the debate keeps going on where South Africans are very disparaging of Zimbabweans and say Zimbabweans are very poor. And sometimes we have to straighten them out and say, for instance, Zimbabwe has its own seeds. South Africa's seeds for all its staple foods are controlled by America, Monsanto, Syngenta, and DuPont. They don't have their own seeds. To the extent that if South Africa went under the sanctions that Zimbabwe is under, the Americans would simply withhold their genetically modified seeds, and South Africa would starve unless Africa helps it. So that's point number one. Point number two, Zimbabwe has gold that is being mined by black people. Zimbabwe is the biggest black gold mining country in Africa, because the gold is not being mined by companies but by normal people who've asked for licenses and are small-scale gold miners. The same with chrome, the same with platinum, the same with coal, and the same with every resource that is in that country. It's accessible to the people except for diamonds. So in South Africa, all their resources belong to corporate companies that are not even South African. Anglo American, BHP, Rio Tinto, Glencore, all those companies are listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, Swiss Stock Exchange, and British Stock Exchange. Those resources are owned by people that are not South African, to the extent that South Africa has given the world more resources than any other country. South Africa has given the world more gold, more platinum, more diamonds, and the value of those beats the amount of oil that Saudi Arabia has given the world. It beats the amount of oil that the United Arab Emirates has given the world. But South Africa does not have a sovereign wealth fund like the United Arab Emirates, which has got $1 billion, $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund. Ask yourself why. Because the resources in South Africa are not owned by South Africans. So whenever these resources are exploited, all the money leaves South Africa and goes to Europe, Germany, and New York. The South African Stock Exchange has been the most profitable stock exchange in the world for the past 120 years. It has made more money than the New York Stock Exchange in terms of returns to its investors. It has made more money than any other stock exchange in terms of return to investors. But South African people still have to murder each other. That's why they've got the highest murder rate in Africa, because they struggle to survive because they do not have factors of production. They struggle to survive because they do not have the ability to eat unless they're working for a white man, or unless they're killing somebody else in order to eat. That's why they've got the highest murder rate on the continent. That is poverty. Zimbabwe, on the other hand, might not have the Nikes, the technologies, all these little consumer things, but Zimbabweans are not killing each other. Ghanaians are not killing each other. Nigerians are not killing each other at the rate that the South Africans are killing themselves, because they've got factors of production. They've got gardens. They've got villages. They've got a goat they can sacrifice. Got a goat that they can kill and eat. That is what life is, and that's the difference between poverty and abundance. We have to start looking at the ability to produce food, the ability to build a shelter with the resources around you as wealth rather than poverty. Because I live in a country that is supposedly the richest country in Africa, where people are so poverty stricken that they're still living like they're in the iron ice age, or I mean the stone age, where they have to kill each other to survive. And when xenophobia happens, I'm always very quick to say to people, xenophobia is not a fight because of nationality. Xenophobia is a fight for resources. And every fight for resources sees people creating groups. You might see that a guy will create groups with the people that he grew up with in his neighborhood, and they go and fight another group. Or they create groups as a taxi association, fighting another taxi association for taxi routes. They create groups as drug dealers, going to fight other drug dealers for territory. They create groups as thugs that are selling tobacco, and they fight other thugs that are fighting tobacco. But in the xenophobia case, South Africans who grew up in the same neighborhood, which is South Africa, fight other people from other neighborhoods for the resources of just getting a job. That's poverty. So Africans must understand this poverty first to start understanding what wealth is, or the opposite of poverty is. And once they understand that the opposite of poverty is the control of resources, then Africans stop waiting for Europeans to come and take their resources to give them a job, and they start wanting to control the resource. After they control the resource, they then start trying to process the resource in order to go to market with a finished good that gives them all the money. This is what the European doesn't want you to understand. Because the African forgets that the European didn't leave Europe because of paper money. He left Europe for the gold, for the platinum, for the resources we have in Africa. He left Europe to come and take our labor, to process the resource. And we are failing to understand this equation, that we have got to control the resource. And we've got to control the resource with every cent that we have. Stop buying Mercedes. Stop buying jets. Stop buying useless Bentleys, Rolls Royces, expensive shoes, expensive clothes, losing our capital for things that don't matter. We have to start controlling the resource, and we become kings. Controlling the resource, we become like Jaja of Opobo, who understood that I need to control the palm oil. And once I control the palm oil, the European will come to the port and wait for me to bring the palm oil to the port, and I can charge him whatever I want. Jaja of Opobo took it a step further, and he said, no, I'm no longer going to sell my palm oil to the European. I'm going to wait for him. When he's going back to Europe, I'm going to follow him with my own ships and take my product directly to market. And Jaja of Opobo created the so well-known concept of cutting out the middleman when he decided to take his own palm oil to Europe. And when he reached to Liverpool, the people in the British were very flabbergasted, because they couldn't sell a drop of their oil, because the owner of the oil, the African, had brought his oil to their ports. Imagine if Nigeria did that today with their crude oil. They didn't sell anyone the crude oil. They created fuel and sold the fuel to the rest of the world. Imagine if Nigeria said, I will no longer allow any European company to exploit my oil. Trust me, Nigeria would be the richest country in the world, and it can be done. Whenever we are saying homecoming to the African Americans, the homecoming shouldn't be about African Americans coming to look for a home here only. It should be about them bringing their savings, bringing their money, bringing their skills, bringing their knowledge to allow us to take that money and to buy control of our resources and to chase all Western country companies controlling our resources out of Africa. It cannot be that the United Kingdom controls $2 trillion of our resources in our continent. The Americans control another $1 billion of our resources. And then the rest control another 500 to another $1 trillion. We cannot have $4 trillion in the hands of Europeans and Westerners. And then they point us to the Chinese. They tell us the Chinese are the problem when all our resources are controlled by Western companies. We've got to start controlling these resources. So African Americans, you in the diaspora, Germany, whatever you earn, the savings you guys have, do not put them into European insurance companies. Do not put them onto European stock exchanges. Do not invest them in European property. Savings must be used to buy control of resources in Africa. Mining rights, concessions for oil, gas concessions, forestries, and we protect those resources. And then we begin to take them to the world at our terms. Finally, once we control our resources, right now, if you want to sell gold, if you want to sell platinum, it must be sold on the London Bullion Exchange. If you want to sell other metals, they're going to be sold on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange Minerals Exchange. And if you also want to sell certain minerals, they may be sold on the Chicago Exchange. Now, the question is why? Why should those countries that don't have resources sell gold on the bullion market? Why should they determine the price of that bullion? Why should they determine the price of palladium and platinum group metals? It doesn't make sense. But we've got so many PhDs, master's degrees, economists in Africa, our Harvard graduates, Harvard professors are from Nigeria, but at the same time, they don't know how to create an exchange for African resources. They don't know how to create a cartel for African resources. Our currencies are said to be weak currencies, not backed up by our resources. Why? Why is that the case?